Hey, what's going on? You're listening to the For Liberty and Justice podcast, where we seek to mobilize the church, wake up the city, and take a stand for liberty and for justice. This week, I sit down with Mandy Drogin from the Texas Public Policy Foundation and talk about how we preserve religious liberty while passing universal school choice for the state of Texas. Let's get this show on the road.
Hey y'all, welcome to Parent Empowerment with Mandy Drogin. I'm Mandy. I'm just a mom sitting down with real Texas parents talking about real conversations of what's going on in our schools. And today I'm so excited. It's a historic day. First off, we just heard Speaker Burrows announce that HB 3 has been filed. That is the Universal Education Savings Accounts program to empower every single parent across the great state of Texas with education freedom. And I am joined by my friend and state representative, Nate Schatzline from House District 93. Nate is a father of three, and he is a fighter in the Texas House for your freedoms. Nate, thanks for joining us.
I'm honored to be on. How refreshing to be on with people that actually want education freedom for the state of Texas. I love it.
I'm giddy, just sitting here looking at
it's a big day.
It's a big day. So let's talk about why you're here. Why, as a father of three, you have been in the trenches alongside the parents, the Parent Empowerment Coalition for years, fighting for their freedoms to have the same opportunities as your children do.
Oh, well, I'll tell you, I mean, the reality is I've been a pastor for the last 11 years. Me and my wife, my college sweetheart, best friend in the entire world. My dad always told me growing up, doesn't matter how ugly you are, you find Jesus Christ and he'll give you a beautiful wife. So found Jesus real quick. But it was so funny, like once we got married and we began to have kids, our firstborn was born, and we're just skeptical. We're skeptical people because we worked for 11 years in the public education system where we were in there doing mentorship programs, and we saw not just woke indoctrination, but truly a lack of quality in some of our ISDs. And Texas has some fantastic public schools, but we also have to point to the fact that we also have some really struggling ISDs that focus more on things that don't matter and shouldn't be in there, like political indoctrination, than they do actually getting scores for math, for reading, for writing, arithmetic, all those things up. And so as we worked in the public schools and also worked in private schools, we just recognized we can't send our kids here. We'll mix that with 2020, where they said, your child has to be vaccinated to go to this school. And we were like, nope, we're out. And so we made the sacrifice. We're not wealthy. We're a young family, just the average Texan family. And we're just like, we have to send our kids to private school. And so we began to make the sacrifice, working multiple jobs in order to put our kids in private school. And in the process of all that, we began to speak out against some of the things we were seeing in the public education system. We're talking about sexual education at the age of 5, explicit visual images for 5-year-olds, mixed with the fact that not only are they being exposed to things that we never wanted them to be exposed to, but they're also not getting the educational outcomes that we would hope that a Texas public school would provide. We should be leading in Texas in public education. And so we started running rallies, we started getting vocal, and I've been a school choice advocate since I learned of the concept, because I really believe, in the same way that Governor Abbott does, that the money should follow the child and parents should have the final say. So it's been awesome.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for being in the trenches and fighting. And we finally, we have to run through the tape. But we're finally here with an exceptional piece of legislation, a piece of legislation that truly does empower every single parent, course corrects. It puts an incentive on a system that, as you noted, has kind of been run off the rails in far too many places. Look, we do have some great public schools, but the reality is that a lot of those with ill intentions, leftists who have figured out a way to insert, as you noted, straight up pornographic images for young kids, teaching them against the values of their children. We just heard last week a parent talk about a child being transitioned behind their parents' back in Houston ISD. This is real. It is going on, and this really does give parents, whether you want to utilize the ESA or not, it gives you the power to go say, hey, school district, we're going to get back to the basics. I want my kids reading by the 3rd grade. I want to make sure that we have the best math, civics, history. We got to teach our kids why we're the greatest, most prosperous nation that's ever existed. Get back to those basics and get away from the identity politics. So 100%. Grateful that you guys are in this battle.
Oh, I'm excited about it. And I think what you said was so important is, like, when you're talking about the public education system, we are hearing lies from the left, and we're hearing misinformation that's being spread on the right. And so now, I believe the lies of the left have ill intent. I mean, it's just a sabotage of our parental rights. That's what this is. And it's tone deaf, too. Because the reality is that parents are so focused on the fact that my child is 7 years old and can't read. My child is 12 and can barely read. This is a problem.
It's a crisis.
And so when I was talking to parents on the left and on the right that had never heard of school choice, universally, before the indoctrination comes in, they're pro-school choice. I mean, it's not even a question. And we see this across the state, where over 60% of parents, whether in the Republican Party or in the Democrat Party, support school choice, overwhelmingly on the Republican side. And so even homeschoolers, we see over 70% of homeschoolers consistently support school choice. And so it's a no-brainer. HB 3 being filed is so exciting to me, because I felt like last session we had a school choice bill that was an okay start, but it wasn't what we needed. It wasn't the way we're going in. HB 3, I can confidently say, now that it's been filed, is the largest introduction to school choice in the United States history. I mean, which is so exciting that this universally applied bill is going to give so much freedom for families that are trapped. They're trapped in failed ISDs.
That's right. It is exciting. You know, we were in the fight together back in 2023 when we didn't get it across the finish line. And I remember someone asked me, why do you think it didn't happen? And I said, you know, God answers questions, prayers, requests in 3 ways. He says yes, and you get what you want. He says no, and you don't. Or he says I have something better planned. This HB 3 is the better than what we ever could have imagined. It is just incredible. But let's go back to what you were just talking about. So we have the misinformation from traditionally the left, right? Or the associations, the TASBs, the TASAs, the AFTs.
Which TASB needs to be defunded
altogether. We're absolutely going to go after that, is right, my friend. But let's go to the legitimate concerns, the fears that Texas private school leaders, Texas homeschool parents have. They have a healthy distrust of government, like you and I do. Right, we support that. And they have legitimate concerns, and there's been some either confusion or misinformation spread. So let's go to homeschooling first. What do we know? Let's talk to them about what we know about homeschooling programs and whether or not HB 3, the ESA, will open the door for regulation onto homeschool families.
Great. And this has been the number one concern of my constituents when they've reached out about school choice as a whole. And it's coming from a leftist propagandist campaign that's trying to spread lies into school choice. But I think it's important because you're right. I think a healthy mistrust or lack of trust of government is good. You know, I think it was Ronald Reagan that talked about how, you know, the most dangerous words is the government is here and ready to help. You know, like that's scary.
No way.
And I think it's important to classify that school choice is not some government handout. In fact, school choice is returning what belongs to the taxpayer so that they can make the choice. It's actually the opposite of a government handout. It's saying we trust you more than you trust us, so we're going to put it back in your hands. And so, in talking about the concern for the overreach of government in our private schools and our home schools, I think there's two questions here. With our private schools, and we'll address that one second. With our home schools, we're talking about them being concerned that, well, Nate, are you going to control what type of curriculum I'm going to put forward? Nate, are you going to control what I can teach my child? Is government going to be looking into what our homeschool looks like if I receive these funds? Am I going to be subject to the STAR test? You know, little things like that, where we can definitively, no questions asked, say absolutely not. And This is important to note because as homeschool families are calling me, and it's every day, because rightfully so, the thing that homeschool families have fought the hardest for hasn't been funding, it's been freedom.
Yes.
They want to maintain the ability to educate their child the way that they feel is best. And we believe that that's a God-given right.
Yeah.
And so at the end of the day, we want homeschoolers to know, and we're going to talk about those provisions, that there are really 3 categories of education now. And I've been telling this to all my homeschool families that just because you're a homeschool family and ESAs can be applied to educating at home doesn't mean you must take an ESA. And so I believe that there will be a little bit of a learning curve with our more skeptical homeschool parents where they might say, hey, I don't know if I want to take an ESA up front because I want to see how this plays out. We encourage that.
Right.
Like, that's totally fine. But what we want is a mom, a single mom, or even a hardworking family, the way that me and my wife were struggling to put our kids in private school, to simply say, wait a second, I can take some of the tax dollars that I'm putting forward that's funding the public ISD system that I don't trust,
right,
and I can bring those kids home and educate them. We need to give them the opportunity. And so the first thing I would say is there are 3 categories. There's traditional public school families, there's traditional private and homeschool families, and then there's ESA recipients. And so the ESA recipients being introduced into the state of Texas is a sign that we're moving in the direction of giving parents the final say, but it does not touch any rights that traditional homeschool and private school families have. And I think that distinction is really important because what we're not saying is, hey, you can't homeschool on your own by yourself anymore. We're saying, hey, here's a return if you'd like it. And if you wouldn't like it, that's okay too. You can continue to do what you're saying. And so I would say that's the key up top. The second thing I would say about homeschool families, which I think is incredibly vital to say, is that when we're talking about any type of government strength, that's what you hear, government strength.
Right.
It's not the comptroller's office within these bills that say, because this is the misconception, well, if I take this money, they're going to control my curriculum, they're going to control what I can teach my child, they're going to check in on me. It's actually not. The only accountability that these funds will have is, I want to make sure you're using this money to educate your child. It's not what is the content you're using, it's I want to make sure you are using content to educate your child. And so the overlook is more to say, hey, we want to make sure that you're not taking this money and going and putting it into your business. We want to make sure you're not taking this money and using it in the wrong way. And so it's really has nothing to do with curriculum. In fact, the families are protected from this. Now, talking about private schools, I think it's also important to say that in the same way traditional private and homeschool families have a choice whether they even want to participate in the ESA program, private schools will have the choice if they want to participate in the ESA program. Now, I can't imagine why a private school wouldn't want to participate in the ESA program, but it's not our job to determine the motives of a private school. It's our job to protect the freedom of the private school. And so that's what this bill does. It quite literally says you do not have to participate. Now, I am hoping that my child's school does participate in this, but that's their choice. I don't get to weigh in on that. And so if they do participate, here's the beautiful thing. And when I've talked with Governor Abbott, he just affirmed all of this. And by the way, I think he deserves some props. There's been no greater champion for school choice than our governor.
Nowhere. Not in Texas, not around the country. I mean, we've got governors and other leaders from around the country going, how did he do this? What did he do? I mean, an absolute warrior over the past 2 years to say, I am giving freedom back to parents.
He hasn't stopped.
It's amazing.
In fact, I commend him all the time for this, but for a governor, a sitting governor, to go into districts where members betrayed their own people and said, I don't want school choice, to rally against them and flip, I don't remember how many, but a ton of these these state rep seats was just heroic, in my opinion. And it's unheard of. And so, because he gets backlash from that. The only positive side is that kids get educational freedom. So with these private schools, one of the things that's important to note is that the qualification to participate is that you are an accredited private school. That's pretty common. I'll be honest, in my district, I don't know of a private school that's not already accredited. So there's no additional requirements or regulations to participate in the ESA program. Now, it does mention norm reference testing. I don't know of a private school that doesn't do a norm reference testing. And I think when parents hear norm reference, they might think, oh, that's the STAR test. It's not. Now, they have the option. if you're a private school to participate in the STAR
Some
test.
do. I
Yeah.
actually know of some that do it, and they do it as a marketing strategy because
Yeah.
their kids do incredible on it, apparently. But yeah, there's no one that's forcing the private schools to
And I
take the
think-
state exam.
I think that's the point, right? It's freedom.
Yeah,
It's freedom.
that's right.
Whatever you want to, and then as a parent, if you say, well, I don't want to send my kids to a private school that does STAR, well, you have that choice.
Yes.
And so the idea is, I know my children's private school, and all three of them go to it, and they love their school. And my children's private school does a norm reference test that helps us understand where that parent is. And I think this aligns with the mission of school choice, which I think is important because everyone's like, oh, testing bad. When did we make merit evil?
Right.
We want to test if our kids are up to date on where they should be. I think the testing results in the public education system have been the most revealing of why school choice must get done.
Right.
When we have reading rates below 20%
Yeah.
at the third grade level, math ratings at 22% at the third grade. It's
Terrifying.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
And we have to course correct now. And so looking at this testing requirement for these private schools, this is simply us not, by the way, saying, oh, if your child does not perform at a certain level, they don't qualify for an ESA. It's
No.
actually so that we can see the efficacy of the program and expand,
Yes.
so that we can say, look at the results. And we trust that if parents begin to have choice, guess what happens? And this is a proven fact. Public education increases in their outcomes.
That's right.
So this was really a fun study. So out of I think it's 32, and correct me if I'm wrong, 32 states that have school choice right now.
Yes.
I'm very sad that Texas wasn't number one, but we can make up for it right now with the largest
right.
program.
That's exactly
So,
right.
Out of 32 states, and I think it was 72 programs within the 32 states, out of all of those, we have seen, get this, an increase in educational outcomes in the public education system.
Yes.
After school choice was passed. Additionally, and this is for our homeschool families, and it's vital that they hear this, out of every single state, all 32 and all 72 programs, over the last 50 years, by the way, this isn't a 10-year study, 20-year study, because some of them will say, well, Nate, there hasn't been enough time. 50 years.
Yep.
Out of 50 years, 72 programs, 32 states, there has not been one additional regulation placed on a traditional homeschool family after school choice is passed in the last 50 years.
That's right.
So the idea that this is, and I've heard this, so we should just call it out, the idea that this is some camel's nose under the tent for government regulation is just simply not true, and
Right.
it's also factually untrue as it relates to the data
Yeah.
for every other state.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And I always try and remind parents who have, again, the understandable concern, but I'm like, anytime the legislature is in session, your liberties are at risk.
No, that's a great point.
Your liberties are at risk because lawmakers go to make laws.
Yes.
And so it really is incumbent vigilance. It is the price that we pay as parents and as patriots to protect the freedoms that we have. Because unfortunately, there are people that want to regulate homeschool and
Correct.
private school, and they do attempt to do that in other
Look, we've
states.
got the head of the House Democrat caucus in the Texas House who sends his kids to private
Yep.
school but doesn't want you to be able
That's
to send
right.
your kid to
It's
private
gatekeeping.
school. It is. And so they're going to attempt to take away the rights of homeschoolers every session.
Yes.
So I've got good news and bad news on this. And I shared this in my virtual town hall with a lot of my homeschool families who rightfully so, as you said, have an untrust of government.
Yes.
And I shared this with them, and I said, I've got good news and I've got bad news. I said, I'm going to start with the bad news because I always like to end on the good. But the bad news is the legislature,
Yes.
and now granted, caveat, I would burn the place to the ground if this took place,
Right.
and I would lead the charge.
I'd be there with you, yes.
But the legislature could right now take away every right.
Yes.
We saw this in Oregon.
Yeah.
Oregon did this.
Yes.
They could take away every right of homeschool families. They could outlaw it
Yes.
today, and they do not need an ESA program to do so.
Right.
And so the idea that an ESA program is a segue into losing rights
Yes.
is mute because it's not needed.
Right.
So that's the bad news. The good news is that, like I said, in every state that's never happened. And additionally, there have been many states where the freedoms of traditional homeschool families have improved.
Right.
after school choice was passed.
Well, they get to build their coalition.
Yes.
The reality is, your colleague, Representative Brent Money, talked about this
That was
when
a
I
great
spoke
podcast,
to him.
by the way.
Thank you.
I'm telling you, you got to go back and watch it.
It is, because he talked about it. He said, look, we want to offer this opportunity to more families who
Yes.
want to homeschool. We want to build our coalition. We want to build the tent that we're under. The more families that are participating, the more families that love homeschooling, the more families to fight to protect the rights of
Yes.
homeschooling family. And that really is so, so important. The more people that are participating are the more people that will fight for it. And that is exactly right. So God forbid the great state of Texas ever shifts to the left and
Yeah.
turns blue. You want to have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people up there at the legislature with pitchforks saying this is not happening.
Correct. And I think that's actually a totally separate and incredible point that, in order for homeschooling, I was talking to my friend Representative Daniel Alders today on the House floor, and we were talking about how when he was being homeschooled as a kid, it was outlawed.
Yeah.
In Texas.
Yeah.
And he's like, and yet we still did it.
Right.
He's like, we were all in. So I think that was admission of breaking the law. I hope I'm not getting him in trouble. But all that said, Daniel Alders is a perfect example of someone that's for school choice, grew up in a traditional homeschool family, and it's like this, like we've been fighting alone for all these
40
years.
years.
Why would we not build a coalition that becomes a mass group that says you will take away no rights
Right.
of my family? And I think that only improves as that tent gets larger.
Absolutely. And that is why the Texas Homeschool Coalition, Tim
Yes.
Lambert's group, the largest
Incredible
homeschool
group.
group. It's amazing. And they're a part of the Parent Empowerment Coalition. They're a part of this mission together. We are working in lockstep to make sure that homeschoolers are protected. But it's why they started 40 years ago, was
Yes.
because it was the same story. You had families that were like, we have got to fight to protect our right to educate our kids.
Correct.
And they are a part of this, and they want this, and they are demanding, along with, I think they said 70% of their 100 or 200,000 plus members say, we want this.
By the way, I was reviewing the Texas Homeschool Coalition study this morning before I came on
Yeah.
because I wanted updated figures. And that's not just a one-time poll that's like, oh, okay, maybe they misunderstood the question. They have polled that 3 times.
3 times.
Over the last few years. And that it has been consistently between 70 and 72%.
Yes.
I mean, 3 polls don't lie.
Right.
And so it's consistent. And by the way, that's amongst, just for everyone watching, that's amongst our African American families, that's amongst our Hispanic families, and it's amongst our Caucasian families. It's amongst all of the families
Yes.
within Texas. It truly, that poll represents Texas.
Yes.
I don't even know that poll was designated Republican and Democrat. I think
I
it
don't
was
think it was.
general families.
Yes, it was just families that were doing it. That's absolutely
Yes.
correct. Okay, so I want to talk about private schools
Yep.
now, because again, healthy distrust of government.
Yep.
We want to make sure that we can teach our babies to love Jesus
Yes.
and celebrate and honor our faith and whatever it is, and provide
just
a
to love
high
America,
quality,
if that's
love
too hard,
America.
you know?
Have a high quality education that's
Yeah.
free of radical indoctrination.
Yeah.
All right, so understandable, legitimate concerns of those in the private school space or that are operating private schools could
Yes.
be that somehow this opens the door for government regulation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, but I want to tell our viewers the legal protections in this piece of legislation in HB3 are the strongest,
Yes.
best legal protections of anywhere in the country. There is no school choice bill, there is no school choice program that has the extensive legal protections that are provided in this bill. And that's why, one of the reasons why this is so incredible and such a historic moment, is we are actually setting the groundwork. While we may not have been first, we get to be the best because we can see where things maybe were not done as well as they should have been, and we're getting it right in this piece of
Yes.
legislation. So let's just read it.
Let's do
just
it.
tell.
And before we do, can
the
I
viewers.
say one more thing?
Yes.
One of the distinctions I like to tell families is we are not privatizing public education,
Right.
and we are not making public private education.
That's right.
And so they're going to maintain a single entity with the same rights that they had before. I was talking with Governor Abbott, and we need to get into reading this, but I was talking to Governor Abbott, and it just was amazing what he said. He said, "Are you hearing the lies that we're defunding public education?" I was like, "Of course I am, Governor." I was like, that's hitting me every day.
Yes.
And he said, one of the things that's been said to him, and these were his words, not mine, and so I want to quote it properly, but he said one of the things is that I've got people that are telling me, I just wish the public education system had the same rights as the schools receiving the ESAs. And he said level playing field. That's the word that keeps being said.
Yes.
And Governor Abbott's response was brilliant. He said, are you telling me that you want private schools to now have taxing authority and be able to pass bonds? Are you telling me that you want private schools to be able to access the federal funds that you're receiving at public education institutions? And it's just a great argument, because the public education people that are against school choice, they don't actually want a fair playing field. They want an advantage.
Right.
And they want an
Always.
advantage not over the private school, over the parent.
Yes.
They want to be able to control the narrative. And so for all of those private schools that are questioning, like, man, I don't know if I want to participate in the program because maybe there's government strings attached, maybe a principal of a private school. One of my best friends in the world, his wife is a headmaster at a private school, and they helped start the private school my kids go to. And so I got a call this morning. I got a text from the head of the school and said, can you do a virtual town hall to talk about our rights? And I'm like, of course. And I said, I can cut it short. They're the same. They're the same.
Right.
In fact,
You
they're
just
actually
clip this. We'll just send it so you can read it
totally.
and say, this is it.
And in fact, they're now codified. I actually believe we're gaining more rights
I
through
agree.
this. So right here, we find in HB 3, I'll read it, I'm going to read it slow just so that we can hear it. I'm a fast talker. So if there's a point, stop me if you want to emphasize. But a state agency or state official may not adopt a rule or take other governmental action related to the program, and of a certified educational assistance organization may not take action that, number one, limits or imposes requirements that are contrary to the religious or institutional values or practices of an educational service provider, vendor of educational products, or program participant. So let's pause right there. That right there says, we're not touching your curriculum, we're not touching your daily schedule, we're not touching your prayer time, we're not touching your religious liberty, we're not touching any of it.
Right.
It is yours. It's quite literally saying, as a government, we are not involved. Or number two, it will not limit an educational service provider, vendor of educational products, or program participant from freely determining the methods of curriculum to educate students, determining admissions and enrollment practices, policies, and standards. I want to come back to that. Or modifying or refusing to modify the provider's vendors or participants' religious or institutional values or practices, operations, conduct, policies, standard assessments, or employment practices based on the provider's, vendors, or participants' religious values or practices, or exercising the provider's, vendors, or participants' religious or institutional practices as the provider, vendor, or participant determines. So this lays it out really well. But one of the concerns, and I just said it and we'll break it down each one, but one of the concerns that I heard from a parent of a private school was, okay, Nate, but right now, like if my child was rescued from a bullying situation in their public school and I used the ESA to put them at a private school, is the private school now obligated to take the student who bullied my child regardless of their behavior? And my answer was no. We're not publicizing private schools and we're not privatizing public schools. Public schools must take every child. Private schools do not. And we just codified it into law right here that private schools can be an ESA recipient, and they can also set their own conduct standards that will not be touched by government overreach.
That's right.
And so we're protecting the child, and that's the core belief of ESAs, is that we're not going to touch your curriculum, we're not going to touch the behavioral standards you have, we're not going to touch your religious views, and actually one of the things that I think is so vitally important is we're not going to touch your hiring and firing standards, meaning this: if you're a Christian school and there is a teacher that does not share the biblical values that you believe in, you can deny them from being hired, or you can still fire them because they don't share your values. This is not discrimination, and the bill shows that.
Yes.
Because you have the right to hire and fire who shares your values. Look, this, I'm telling you, this is the strongest language out of any state I have ever seen to protect private and home schools.
Absolutely. I mean, it is, I could not have said it better, because they threw the kitchen sink in here.
Yes.
I mean, it was, we are going to tell you clearly, explicitly, you cannot do this. Anything. You
Correct.
cannot do anything. If a student utilizes an ESA to send the tuition payment to your school, that's it.
Yes.
That's all it is. We're just saying they have that right. You may choose to accept it. You don't have to change, as you said, you don't have to change your admissions process.
Correct.
If you do an interview, a lot of private schools interview the family, interview the parents. They want
Ours
to make
does.
sure, they want to make sure they're value aligned.
Yes.
And that is their right. And this supports every single aspect of it. What it's also going to do, which I'm really excited about, people don't realize this, and you touched on this a minute at the beginning of the podcast. People a lot of times have the misconception that private schools are for, quote, rich white people. I mean, that's what they're saying out there, right?
Yeah, it's every tweet.
Every tweet, pretty much, led by, as you said, Trey Martinez Fisher and Gene Wu and I don't want. What did they say at the press conference? They don't want those kids at their private schools.
No, that's exactly what they said.
Actually, schools. And I was like, you are an awful human being.
I would tell you the verbiage that's being used right now is true bigotry. It's true racism, and it's truly discriminatory.
Yes.
And hear me, it's against our kids.
Yes.
And we have so, and I don't say we, but I say as a society, we have so accepted the virtue signaling of the left that we have fallen victim to allowing them to discriminate against our own children.
Yes.
This is a major problem, and our kids deserve bold solutions.
Yeah.
They deserve us to tell the truth and fight for the truth, and they deserve us to not back down no matter if we're being called different names. And I know you have, I know I have, I know our governor has on a daily basis. We're not scared.
No.
We're not worried about it, and we're not backing down. We are going to pass this policy.
That's right. And that, this is the thing that I've had a lot of people ask me, like, why are you doing it? Because as you said, we're called all names under the book or under the sun, having the books thrown at us, like anything they can do to try and stop us. But the reality is the system fights to protect itself, its privilege, its money and power.
Correct.
Versus we're fighting for a much more noble cause.
Correct.
We're fighting with our hearts because we love our children. It's not money.
Yeah.
It's not power. It's to say, this is for the future of my children, for your children, and all the children in Texas.
And I'll tell you this, I think one of the key distinctions here is, one of the arguments from the left is, I don't want my tax dollars to, fund your religious indoctrination, which I think is hilarious.
Right.
Because the reality is my tax dollars are funding their religious indoctrination every day. It's funding trans flags being hung in the classroom.
Yes.
It's funding social transitioning of children, which will eventually lead to the mutilation of their bodies prematurely. It's funding people telling children that they should hate America and that this is an oppressive nation and that this nation is not the American dream that it was cut out to be, and that it's literally telling. We have public schools in Texas right now that are teaching children that because of the color of their skin, they'll never have the opportunities that you or I will have. And the irony of that is we live in the freest state, in the freest country in the history of the world, and they are doing this to push an agenda, not to educate children. And I will tell you, I really believe this. I believe that the key to a successful school choice program is simply saying, hey, guess what? If you want to teach that classroom trans indoctrination, I'm not even attacking you right now. I'm telling a mom she doesn't have to take it anymore.
That's right. You can. That is 100% it. If this is what you and those in your school have decided to do, then I'm fighting you on that.
Yep.
I think you're going to have some problems.
But don't force my kid to participate.
That's right. But my kid and the other children of Texas, the families who don't have the resources or the support to remove those children, they absolutely cannot and should not and will not very soon when we pass this be forced to sit in classrooms or to, one of the things you touched on, this radical gender ideology. It's all part of the identity politics. One of the things that just makes me sick to my stomach, particularly because we're in February, Black History Month. I've seen some things posted, and actually had a father reach out to me where they're teaching children to distrust each other. And I talk about this divisive mentality, the oppressed versus the oppressor, the victim versus the victimizer. We have reports of them lining kids up at the baseline of basketball courts to do privilege walks.
Correct.
It's absolutely absurd. And, when I'm older than you, but when I was a girl, we had.
You didn't have to say that on here.
But I'm like, I was about to say, okay, you had this too. And I was like, maybe you didn't, but there was a poster on the wall, and it was Martin Luther King Jr.
100%.
And he was saying, I have a dream that one day my 4 children will live in a country where they're judged by the content of their character and
Yes.
not the colors of skin. And yet, we are teaching children to judge everything by the color of their skin.
Yes.
Or the identity of their sexual orientation. I mean,
No,
it is
you're right.
radical and it is wild.
And we're watching as President Donald Trump has declared war on woke and
Yes.
DEI policies
Yes.
in the military and all these institutions. We're now watching Governor Abbott do the same thing and
Right
declare
here.
war on DEI because
Yep.
it's not a war on anybody for the color of their skin. It's a
Yep.
war against that would devalue merit.
That's right.
And so this is a separate topic, but I've now filed bills to take DEI out of county governments, city governments, and K through 12 education. But we're watching this, and until that happens, we've got to give options. And even when it happens, there will still be bad actors that continue to do so.
Yes.
And parents should have the ability to simply say, hey, you know what? This doesn't align with my family's values. I hope I'm not sharing too much, but my legislative director went to a school in Fort Worth ISD, and he publicly has put this out on Twitter where he was a part of a program that literally made them publicly in a group setting say the true founder of America was Barack Obama. Now, let's talk. We're not even going to discuss the merits of it. The reality is, it's just factually untrue.
Right.
Like
You're just wrong.
Whether you want to say the words or not, this is a picture of putting political indoctrination
Yes.
over genuine education.
That's right.
And so, let me be clear. If my child came home from school, from a private or public school, and said, hey, I heard that Barack Obama founded America, I would say, let me talk to your teacher about
Right.
this, because this is insane.
Right.
And there is no limit to how far the left will go if we don't put the limit.
That's right.
And that's what this is.
Well, thank you for fighting back. I'm so excited to be here. You're about to engage on just what I think is just the most exciting experience ever to
Yeah.
deliver freedom to the parents of Texas. I'm just holding it. I'm like, oh man,
gonna
I'm
be
here. But
amazing.
I want you to look in that camera right there.
Yeah.
I want you to talk to the parents, to the patriots, and to your colleagues in the
Yeah.
legislature. Tell them why it is crucial that we all stand together. We continue to fight until this bill is signed by our great governor's pen. Fight for the children and the next generation of Texas.
I
Tell
love
them
it.
why.
So here's the reality. I want to talk to 3 people. I want to talk to Democrat parents, because the reality, you might be hearing this and you've immediately turned off your brain because you're like, if that's a Republican, I don't want this. I want to be clear. I want to fight for a state where you get to teach your child your values, not my values, but your values. This is about parental empowerment. And for every Republican family out there that's sitting here going, man, I'm a little bit wary of any type of government overreach, I'm telling you right now, and I put my reputation on this bill not only does not take away the rights of traditional homeschool and private school families, this bill actually codifies into law that you do have those rights. This is further empowerment for you, and you can always say no to the ESA program, but I hope you will not, because I'm telling you, this is the most exciting time to be a Texan, where we are actually going to pass, and we are going to pass school choice to empower every parent. And I want to talk to my colleagues. I want to talk to those on the right and the left. This is not a partisan bill. This is not a bill that you're voting on out of loyalty to the governor, who is an incredible leader on this, but that's not what this is. This isn't a loyalty vote. This is a loyalty vote to your constituents. This is you simply saying, I trust moms and dads more than any education bureaucrat, more than any person that's overseeing a school, more than any curriculum director, more than any writer, more than any, I trust you as the parent. That's what this vote is for. And so I truly believe that there's an opportunity to cross the aisle on this issue, and for Democrats to come together and say, you know what, this is not about right versus left. This is about freedom and parental rights. Let's get this thing done.